Welcome to a special edition of the New Hampshire Journal podcast. I am Michael Graham, live from Castro's in Bedford. With me, thousands of miles away down in Washington, D.C., the lovely and talented Matthew Bartlett, occasional Granite Stater at Shelley's in Washington, D.C. Bartlett, how you doing?
Well, let me tell you, Castro's back room is where my career was born, down in
Castro's
Nashua.
back room?
Bedford, Manchester, the old stomping grounds, and now down here in Sin City, Washington, D.C.
Well, you're in the wrong place, man, because literally just minutes ago, I'm at Bedford's and Castro. Who comes walking in? Legendary cigar maker Rocky Patel. I'm not joking. Got a chance to chat with him for a few minutes. He recommended a cigar which I've never had before. I'm having it right now, the 60 here. Have you ever had one of these?
Yeah, actually went down to Honduras with Rocky Patel back in the day and saw his production, his fields was amazing.
If you start telling the Bono stories, I'm going to start pointing out to our viewers that what died on your head is either a badger or a beaver, and we're trying to decide which one it is. Go ahead and take care of it. Look, we threw this together I'll be honest with you. Bartlett and I threw this together the last second because the only thing anyone in New Hampshire politics or American politics is talking about right now is the murder of Charlie Kirk. And, the newsletter we did last night, we had a bunch of news stories. We just set them aside. No one wanted to read about the other stuff going on. It's the Charlie Kirk incident. And it's interesting. I had 2 minutes with Rocky, didn't know he was going to be here. And I asked him the question I want to ask you, Bartlett. People are angry that literally violent. People feel like America's more divided than ever it is. You and I go to cigar places all over the country. And what's the one thing that doesn't happen? Political arguments, anger. Sure, there's plenty of debate and there's plenty of great conversation, but it doesn't matter where you are. What is it about cigar culture that we are getting when we're at Castro's in Bedford or Shelley's in DC that American politics isn't?
Yeah, divided by party, united by leaf. I think I even wrote a quick little piece for New
Inside
Hampshire
Sources.
Journal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right after the election, cigars tend to bring people together. Tends to be much more deliberative. You're talking. It's cerebral. You're relaxed. Your guard is down. Again, you're blowing off steam, blowing some smoke. I think it's all conducive to dialogue. Maybe something that we don't do enough, or maybe do well in this country. Talking to each other, and that is in part listening to each other too.
Okay, I want to run some theories by you. One of them is a cigar bar is the opposite of social media. Not only are you not, anonymous, you're right in each other's faces.
Boy, that's a good point.
You're also in a place where people want to have a good time. Like, it's not like you're stopping by the dentist. It's not even like a restaurant where, hey, I got to grab a bite to eat. I'm here to eat. In other words, I'm basically doing a function. You go to a cigar place because you want a little mini vacation. You want to relax. No one wants to ruin it by being the jerk. And then, of course, it doesn't hurt. They're in a room with people holding things that are on fire. So that kind of calms you down from your excesses when you know what's going on from a physics standpoint.
Yeah, and I think you can have a drink, but I think the emphasis is on the cigar as opposed to the bar.
Yeah.
You're not having alcohol-fueled, conversations that get emotional, that get out of hand.
Exactly.
It is, again, a much more relaxed environment that is much more conducive to talking, listening, the exchange of ideas, the diversity of thought, which is all, not just welcomed in America. That's a true part of America.
So I'm going to add another theory, which is that because you're in this place that is, politically neutral territory, we've turned so many spots into politically, amped up, politically dangerous, problematic territory. But obviously, college campuses, and we'll get to that in a minute. That more of normal. I would argue that you can make the case that normal America is no more divided or violent than they normally are. You just have this layer of social media that's throwing off all the meters. And so it seems like everyone's at each other's throats. But once again, as soon as you sit down, think about all the times you and I have to deal with people that we don't agree with politically on a business thing. I'm selling them an ad for Inside Sources, whatever. There's no yell. There's no, I can't do business with you. You're a Republican. Or that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Free speech, our First Amendment rights is a reason that is the number one thing that they did. And sometimes you're right. Maybe that is challenged by the invention of television or the internet or now social media. And I think that you assert that right to free speech, but there's also a responsibility to that, to call out, some of the more, ridiculous notions out there and to affirm what is right in our country.
So let's assume that most Americans are normal, not angry, that it's very similar to the America that we think of, most of us think of. We still do have this rising tide of political violence, indisputable. Let's talk a little bit about what we know. And as we record this, it's Friday afternoon. There's still a lot more to know. Tyler Robinson, 22, his father figured out that he was the alleged murderer of Charlie Kirk, called the police. His father involved in law enforcement. He wasn't an outsider. I thought it was interesting. Governor Spencer Cox of Utah, who, by the way, had a very good moment as a leader. So people are already talking about the political part. Set aside the partisan, what will he run for part? Just as a leader, he was doing what you want a leader to do. Calm, measured, but passionate. And he shared with you how he really felt. He said, we really hope this wasn't someone from Utah. I think it's significant that it was, in fact, a local guy. I think so. But based on what we know about the alleged assassin, about the shooting itself, give me the top, Matt Bartlett, 2 or 3 reactions to where we are right now.
This is something of a lone wolf, twisted person who was motivated not just by ideology, but motivated to silence someone who he disagreed with. This is the most abhorrent, notion, a really inflection point, a historic moment, a Charlie Kirk, a rising young political figure in our nation who asserted his right to free speech routinely on display. Welcome that challenge. A healthy, robust debate was met with a bullet. He is the true victim here. You think about Charlie, you think about his family, and now we have, again, just a twisted, sick individial. Charlie was a person.
Well, let me interrupt right now because you've said so many things that are wrong. I want to come back to that. Everything about Charlie Kirk is right, but we'll get to the shoes. You've done a lot of European TV. I was on British TV earlier today, and they were kind of trying to get me to explain who Charlie Kirk is. And I think it was important to note, a lot of people, maybe most people, didn't know who Charlie Kirk was. He had a large but niche audience. How do you explain who Charlie Kirk was, and why do you think it is so significant that let's face it, there are a lot of people that if you want to be a political assassin, you could target politicians, media types, whatever. Why was the targeting of Charlie Kirk, in your opinion, significant?
This is someone who, again, at 31 years old, ran $100 million media company. Someone who never attended college, yet in 2012 started a movement on college campuses to help shape, maybe reshape conservative ideology. And in today's day and age, where media is consumed on your phone, we're talking about a generational figure here. So maybe most people didn't know, but the younger generation certainly did. And that this was not just talking about culture, talking about his thoughts, but a personal bond that you knew this person over social media on your phone for many years. And again, a figure that resonated in politics, an ally, a political ally of President Trump, but also a true friend of the president and the vice president and members of Congress. So again, you can't overstate his impact in American politics or his significance with Trump and his coalition.
So let me build on a couple of things. One is because in New Hampshire Journal is a politics news outlet. That's our whole thing. Crass partisan politics is always uncomfortable at a moment like this, but it needs to be acknowledged. The impact of Turning Point USA on the ground in purple states, getting the lowest of low motivation voters, young guys. I mean, think about the young guy. Think about when you were a 20-something, think about the 20-something to your life. Trying to get them to just clean up their own bedroom is freaking impossible. And you're going to get them to drive to a polling place and stand in line and vote for some guy. He did that. It had real impacts. I've had smart political people say that they think TPUSA may have been the margin of victory in a place like Arizona, for congressional races, et cetera. So if TPUSA is not the same thing in 2026 that it was in 2024, there could be a very practical, pragmatic impact on how elections turn out. That's the crass part. I think the part you're talking about, the personal connection, is he was in a lot of ways a symbol of those young voters that have just really disturbed a lot of people on the left. The idea that you lose young people, and they're not supposed to do that. By the way, that's, you and I know that's a myth. Reagan did great with young voters. George W. did fine with young voters. The notion that it's 80-20 Democrat, that was never true. But definitely in the Obama and Trump years, there was a dip, and Charlie Kirk was the guy who was turning that around. That's a real political problem for Democrats, and they didn't like it, and they didn't like how he was doing it. He was doing it by showing up and saying, I want to talk to you about the political issues. And people would say, the way you talk about it makes me feel bad. Listen to you say that biology actually is determinate, and I can't pretend to be a girl and be a girl, upsets me. And his answer was, I don't care. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to talk about the issue and the logic and the reason. And that absolutely flies against the culture that is part of the dominant culture of the left. I think that's one reason why he was on the list of, if you were part of that angry group, his was a face that popped up on your short list.
Yeah, I think, largely that's correct. This was someone who would engage in debate, and in times, infuriate those that, I don't want to say debated him, because I think, largely he was very civil in his debate.
Yeah.
But you're right. It caused anger among those that were of an opposing political position, frustration. That, again, this is someone who welcomed the debate. He would say, "Come challenge me to have this conversation." And it seems as if that breeded not just resentment, but that breeded hate, and that is what motivated this shooter.
There's a shorthand on the social media right, the younger right. Ben Shapiro, I think, popularized something like this, but basically it's facts don't care about your feelings, math don't care about your feelings. And so the shorthand argument for people under 30 about politics is really what one team calls facts versus feels. Now, whether their facts are correct is separate. The point is, you have people who are motivated by, we have to change words because of feelings. We have to change behavior because of feelings. So it's like going, no, I don't have to do that at all. No, you're just wrong. That's just not true. And that's a fundamental fight. This is why I think you were wrong when you called the shooter a lone wolf. He had the Antifa crap on his bullets, according to the little bit. And once again, this is so early. Who knows? We may find out next Thursday the guy was whatever, a secret, agent of the Illuminati. I don't know.
I mean, let's just pump the brakes here. What we do know, and that this was not a coordinated. Let's not.
But that's different from a lone wolf. And in my opinion,
It is not. Well,
this is how I see it. He was part of this whole Antifa movement that's been around for a decade.
That is not.
And that's significant.
We should recognize the extremes, but we should not define each other by the extremes. That is very critical. That is important. That you could look very unfortunately throughout our very recent history of attacks perpetrated on Democrats, perpetrated on Republicans, and you just want to be very careful that we condemn the acts. We certainly condemn those that do it, but let us not paint a wider brush that condemns or somehow says that millions of Americans that think differently than you are now a part of this or a conspiracy. Right. This looks like a deeply disturbed individual who was politically motivated, who took it upon himself, at the barrel of a gun to end someone else's life.
Matthew Bartlett, you're wrong. No, I mean, I think you're looking at it.
This is something I hear from Michael Graham every morning,
and sadly, because I'm correct and you're wrong. Look, the Antifa movement. Let's set aside this shooting. The Antifa movement is already a problem, and it's a problem for multiple reasons. You see it in Portland, you see it in Seattle. You see it the strange, bizarre Zizian cult with its intellectual Antifa, trans, whatever. There is a movement that is a problem because it says straight up, as they did when they established the Chaz zone in Seattle a few years ago, that violence in the name of our politics is okay. The second problem we have is Antifa has room in the cultural elites of our society for their existence. In other words, if the Klan were doing this crap, it'd all be, you're the Klan, you're evil, you're awful. The New York Times regularly has content for people, and not saying they're saying go kill, but they're saying, hey, that Antifa, they're onto something. That now that I think about that Antifa, my favorite, what's wrong with being anti-fascist? My grandfather fought the Nazis. He was an anti-fascist. Anyone who says that, by the way, is too stupid to be allowed in a conversation. That movement is real, and that movement is not a lone wolf problem. That movement is a movement problem, just like ISIS when the guy in the Pulse nightclub murdered all those people in the name of ISIS, he wasn't an agent of ISIS or hired or anything. He was a lone wolf in the sense he did it by himself, but he was acting on the ideas of ISIS. Antifa is the ISIS of American politics.
I'm not sure. We talk about Antifa on the right as if it is some sort of an organized,
I didn't
established
say organized.
notion.
I just said embraceable. It's just an embraceable notion.
Again, this loose notion of a decentralized opposition, I recognize that, but this would be, and I hate to, would we demonize MAGA, for the acts of someone or a MAGA inspired?
Okay.
Let's just be very clear here, or try to be cautious a little bit here. That again, we have seen horrific acts, and it is important to recognize them, but we should not define our opposition by this notion that they are all linked together and that it is a grand conspiracy. Again, candidly speaking, this was a lone person that got on a roof with a gun and took another man's life. And then you have to look at, the family turned him in. This was law enforcement that put out pictures, and that, thank God Almighty, that his father, did the right thing here. So let's just be very crystal clear with what we are talking about. So much of this, again, turns to widespread condemnation. Maybe some of that could be accurate, but let's not, cast too much so that we end up in places that are just unfounded.
And so let's go back to why I'm right. Thank you for making my point. Why do you put up with me, man? I do not understand. Anyway, the fact that this guy could grow up, first of all, the governor's saying, I don't want to be from Utah. There were a lot of people thinking he wouldn't be from Utah because, let's face it, Utah, strong Mormon tradition, strong family values, strong communities. The guy's dad was in law enforcement. I mean, this guy had, if you are talking about, like, if you need all the social underpinnings to help you make better, more life-affirming decisions, based on what we know, this guy had a ton of that. And yet he still succumbed. Why? Because the ideology of Antifa pushed out over social media, embraced by people in the at the CNN, New York Times level as being a reasonable idea.
Hold on. No.
Dude, let me finish. Right now, there are people on CNN, on the New York Times, who will say that words are violence.
I'm not
sure
one of the
underpinnings. Of course it is.
I'm not sure that's accurate.
Okay. Well, I will send you the links.
That's fair.
Okay. So,
but again,
but see what I'm saying? Like if MAGA, you said, what if MAGA was doing it? If MAGA was doing this, it would be dead already. It'd be totally, no one would back it up. It would be been wiped out as a movement. If MAGA had done what Antifa's done over the past 5-10 years, it would be gone. No one would put up with it. No one will be saying, well, they've got a point, or well, Trump, at least they're fighting Trump.
Again, as a Republican, I have heard preposterous notions regarding MAGA and January 6th, regarding Charlottesville, regarding Paul Pelosi, and the response to Paul Pelosi. You can say Paul Pelosi's attacker was mentally ill. I 100% agree with that. But yet, what did this mentally ill person do? Went after Speaker Pelosi and her husband. In Minnesota, a mentally deranged person went and killed Democrats. So there is some political targeting there that I think we need to recognize, and certainly not blame or demonize MAGA. It would be as preposterous on the right, and I am not looking to be as preposterous in response to this. So let's just be very clear that an individual,
I think you're being naive and not preposterous.
A twisted individual can exist anywhere. And the notion that it is surprising that it happened in Utah, we're talking about the acts of one individual in a free and open society. It is very hard to extrapolate and make generalizations on one twisted, sick fuck of an individual in Utah and extrapolate into larger.
Thank you, family-friendly Matthew Bartlett. Thank you very much.
We should and words cannot express the outrage and anger I have for them.
Right.
But again, like you said, maybe feelings shouldn't drive this. Maybe
so. Let me try another example of how this is bigger and see if you can buy into it. And that is the culture of the acceptance of violence and the acceptance of extreme ideology that promotes violence, like words are violence and et cetera, that we find on college campuses. I mean, it is not a coincidence that if you want to find crime going on in America right now, the first place you might stop is about 35 feet away from where Matt Bartlett is sitting. Maybe. Well, I don't know. The National Guard's there, so you're good. But you might start in Chicago and DC, but the second place you're going to go is college campuses because they're full of people shoving people, shutting down buildings, chanting calls for violence, like globalize the Intifada and from the river to the sea, open, overt claims calling for violence. And not only does it happen all the time, it's completely accepted because the culture on college campuses has embraced this dangerous view of political discourse, which is, as the new Fire poll showed just out this week, 1 in 3 college students say it is at least sometimes okay to use violence to stop someone from speaking. That hasn't happened by accident. It's not happened because America is anti-free speech. We're not. It's happened because these college campuses are violence equals speech hubs that are teaching our young people and our future educators terrible intellectual garbage.
Yeah, again, tend to agree with a lot of what you're saying. Let's be clear, as Charlie Kirk would have asserted, free speech on college campus should be warranted, welcomed, and that when you have efforts to stifle that, that is more than problematic. But in terms of crimes, I'm not sure that university campuses, a liberal bias, of course. I'm here in Washington D.C. Forget the crime. We want to talk about liberal bias here. I was a Trump appointee in the first administration,
right.
And I can assure you that there was a notion that still prevails. That again, if you're talking about Donald Trump or any of his supporters, whatever you say, whatever you do, whatever is justified.
Sure, exactly.
And I think I don't want to say that is the causation. But there is a correlation to this in political violence. Again, we don't blame President Trump. We don't blame Biden. We don't blame Bernie Sanders. Politicians for their rhetoric as a motivating factor in the actions of the twisted, right? But it's important to also recognize that again, this notion of a breakdown in society around whatever if you feel aggrieved. If you feel aggrieved in society, then you're allowed to do whatever you want.
Right.
I think that's really some of the heart of this. I think it's important to, again, recognize it in its place, and to be careful and cautious here. But yeah, I've seen it. I've borne witness to it. Am I going to tell you that I am now some sort of a victim? There's a victim here. His name is Charlie Kirk.
Yeah.
I think we should all learn from this and remember that he is the true victim here. And maybe, let's be careful in our own words and our own thoughts.
But there are other potential victims. Obviously, Donald Trump, 2 assassination attempts spring up right to mind. You had that terrible incident in Minnesota where there was a crazy mix of insanity and politics, apparently from the right. Although it's unclear, but whatever.
Not sure that's even from the right. That's even from the right.
Whatever.
The guy said that Tim Walz directed him to go.
There's individual crazies. I agree with you. And politics and whipping, the guy who shot up the baseball game is the fact that wasn't a bigger story. I just still stuns me. I agree with you on that. But I just want to get back to this idea that college campuses are dominated by one ideology. It's the left. And I'm not saying Democratic Party, at least it's beyond red and blue. They're just totally dominated by a political view. And that critical theory political view is crazy. It is crazy. And yet society has tolerated it because, I don't want to be anti-intellectual and I don't want someone to call me a book burner or whatever. Let me tell you something. If your kid has Ibram X. Kendi on his bookshelves, take it. I don't care if you burn it. Just don't let him read this hateful crap that says that someone's skin color makes them inherently good or inherently evil. That's an evil idea. And yet it is widely disseminated on college campuses from New Hampshire to California. And so one of the things that Trump has done by waging war in the colleges, as usual, he's using a shotgun and a blunderbuss when what you need is a specific target and solve this problem. But he's on to something. The culture on college campuses is anti our democratic system as we do it, that is free speech, treat everyone equally. And the result is, have you noticed how many of the people who said dumb stuff about Charlie Kirk, and I'm glad he's dead, have been public school teachers? Where did those public school teachers go? They went to colleges. What classes they sit through? Critical theory classes. This crap is real. And now it's having an impact on our culture beyond the ivy walls of Harvard, Yale, and Columbia.
I mean, yes. And how do you counter that? Well, let's look what happened recently. Not only did, Charlie Kirk, but millions of Americans rejected some of these notions, certainly at the ballot box, and even on college campuses. You've seen, a rejection, the pendulum swinging. Why? How? Not with lawfare, not with guns and violence,
Right.
but with a counter argument. You do not match madness with madness. You counter madness with soundness, with reason, with logic. And I would argue that's in part why Charlie Kirk was so effective as a communicator, was so effective as a political organizer. And that's in part why, again, Republicans, not only did Trump win, but across the nation, you saw, millions of more Americans rejecting some of these policies and postures of the left and going in a different pathway, knowing
So
full well that again, some of this pendulum can swing.
so now let's finish up with just crass partisanship and what does Jonah Goldberg call it? Punditry, rank punditry. Let's do some rank punditry here. I think typically a midterm election, obviously the party in power doesn't do well. And as Trump happened in 2018, that Republicans had a bad year, et cetera. But you had something weird in 2022, which was a not great year for Republicans, despite the horrible inflation. I mean, you thought people were just walking dead when inflation was 10%. What happened? The Dobbs decision changed the math. It just completely, you took that stew and you added this huge can of another ingredient. It changed the flavor entirely. Talk about Dobbs on a future podcast. Do you think it's reasonable to say that, or do you think it's a not crazy view of the future to say, you take this fear of disorder that's being fed by all the things from the assassination, crime, et cetera, add the election of open communists like Zoran Mondami in New York City, and 2024 could be about something just like 2026. 2026 could be like 2022. That is, the normal stew has these weird ingredients, and you might not get the big Democratic buffet that they're counting on.
Yeah, listen, anything is possible, but you just mentioned 2018, right? Thought of as a massive year for Democrats, and they won back the House. In 2018, Republicans won 2 more Senate seats.
Yeah, but that was
a
the
net.
map. Come on, dude. That was the map. That wasn't.
Welcome to reality. Yeah, I'm not sure the point you're arguing, a point without distinction. So again, yes, you saw 2022, where Republicans actually did win the House back, and lost it with some Senate candidates. What happens in 2024 is very unclear. Some of these issues, whether it's Epstein, whether it's the assassination, are very apolitical, asymmetric in some ways. I'm not sure that they necessarily change votes. You also have redistricting, which could have a much larger effect, I would argue, than maybe some of the issues that we're talking about, the economy in general. And then you have as you just called it, a Senate that could be interesting, where you could see potentially pickups for Republicans. How shocking could that be? Or you could see, I'm talking with people, a realistic notion that like a month ago, 2 months ago, it was unthought of that Democrats could win the Senate. And now we're looking at the map saying maybe. What happens in North Carolina? What happens in Maine? What happens in Ohio? Maybe even does Texas go sideways like it did with Alabama? What?
I don't know that we have well, that's true. I guess the Judge Roy Moore candidate would be Paxton, right? So that
we thought Georgia, that the Democrats were just renting seats.
I can't believe that Trump is going to screw Georgia up again. I mean, how many times can he screw up the same state?
So yeah, anything is possible. I will say this, that the outrage machine that we felt in 2018 in this town does not seem to be the same outrage machine.
What do you mean by that?
Feeling? 2018, you were still reeling up from shocking win in 2016. And there was, protests and there were movements, in DC and everywhere. You think 2008, this massive Democrat doesn't feel that way right now. It could be brewing, it could be bubbling under the surface here, especially around economic issues regarding affordability. That could be the salient issue, and once again, but it just doesn't feel. Again, Trump's historic comeback in 2024, and not just that he won and a commanding victory of the popular vote in every swing state, but how he did it. Right. If you told me again, Trump, kind of snuck one past the goalie in 2016 with a largely forgotten white man, working class voter, and then returned to power with a massive swath of a rainbow coalition of working people, Asian Americans, Black American, How many hyphenated groups you want to hodgepodge together, leaving the Democratic Party, to be something of a white, woke, liberal, elite party that is regional. We'll see how this all plays out.
Well, speaking of white, elite, affluent, college-educated voters, New Hampshire. So, as you know, I've been saying to anyone who'll listen, New Hampshire doesn't vote Republican at the federal level. It just doesn't happen. Don't think about it. They've done it once since 2010, and that was a fluke. Frank Inta winning back his seat. So you're setting that one aside is zero. Haven't come close. Didn't matter. Caroline Leavitt, great candidate, great money, lost by the exact same percentage as former state senator Russell Prescott, one of the worst candidates I've ever seen run for anything ever. So, it doesn't really matter. I got to tell you, the Johnny Sununu news, not because of we're going to find out now what kind of candidate he is. It's been a while, but and obviously it's been a long while. But it's the fact that it's a Sununu name. It's kind of a reset. You could see some resources here. I'm starting to prepare to say that maybe it's theoretically possible for a Republican to win a federal race in New Hampshire. Your thoughts, Matthew Bartlett?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when the counter argument was made that, boy, Democrats just can't win in New Hampshire federally. It was a long growing up. We were red, and you think of Judd Gregg, and you think of John Sununu, and you think of Bill
Charlie Bass. I mean, if you count Charlie as a Republican, that's a close call, but still, sure.
So again, that's the thing about politics. Things can change. And we will see what happens. West Virginia used to be one of the bluest states in the nation. And now it's already red. New Hampshire, we used to be red. And then, I think we're summarize purple.
Summarize in a sentence or two how DC views the idea of a Johnny Sununu candidacy, even though you've already got former U.S. Senator Scott Brown and State Senator Dan Innes in the Republican primary.
I want to be careful here.
Oh, don't do that. Get him another drink. Shelley's, bring him another one.
I would just say that, at least from a Republican perspective, I don't think there's ever been this type of enthusiasm, hope, and opportunity for a candidate who truly gets New Hampshire, a cerebral conservative.
Let me tell you, at Inside Sources, what we're hearing from DC is money, money, money. That if you have a real fight up here, that's money that Democrats have to spend on a blue trending seat. And where is the money going to go? If you've got, North Carolina, which has had a tough time electing federal Democrats already, Georgia, like you said, a lot of people think they're just renting the seats. You got Michigan with some sketchy candidates on the Democratic side. It is going to be really tempting to say, well, first things first, let's dump a bunch of money to save something that's already blue. It's safe money. So I'm saying it's safer to spend it in a blue state than to send it in a purple or in Georgia, a red state. That's a real problem for Democrats. If they got to find out, they're already struggling on fundraising, find another 50, 80 million at the national level to dump into New Hampshire. That was not on their budget for 2026.
Again, from just a purely spectator sport standpoint here, I can't remember you would have to go back to, Ayat Hassan. This looks to be just a blockbuster, a heavyweight fight here. Johnny Sununu and Chris Pappas, who I can go on and on about how both of them have just been legendary in their own rights. Chris Pappas winning in Republican district time after time after time, a storied name in Manchester with the Puritan, and Johnny Sununu, a legendary family, a cerebral guy who is, rumored to be the smartest guy in DC and the Republican Party for a long time. Always thought of
you got to stop listening to Halperin, man. Don't listen to Mark Halperin on that stuff.
So again, this could be a blockbuster. How they maneuver, how they counter their own parties at times, how they represent New Hampshire. We are a distinct brand of politics, even nationally speaking, even regionally within New England, as well as the atmospheric pressure of the times, the day and age. So it's going to be amazing.
I want to wrap up with this before we do the most important thing, which is talk little cigars. Look at what's happening right now. Across the border in Maine, you've got an incumbent Republican U.S. Senator. Democrats are really going to try to knock her off, but she's always done well. She's going to have a ton of money. And that's part of the Boston what do they call it? DMI or DSA, whatever, the media market, basically. Then you've got former Governor Paul LePage running in a district that is definitely a Republican district without Congressman Golden. Now imagine if you have a competitive U.S. Senate race, and I just want to say this on the record about Scott Brown. He is so hungry. If hard work and just, I'm going to gut it out. If you think he's going to drop out, you wake up. He ain't dropping out. So whatever that happens, my point is you got a lot of heat. And then maybe the first congressional district, maybe you get a really well-funded candidate who also attracts him. All of a sudden now you've got, do you agree with me that good competitive candidates breed competitive candidates? In other words, if you've got one race going well, it's easier for the other races. And then if 2 or 3 races start going the same direction, and Republicans along the eastern border of New Hampshire are all jazzed up because there's all these races going on, it can have an impact that's bigger than any individual race.
Yeah, I think that's right. Good gets better, bad gets worse. When you have an entire team on the field, we've had Patriot seasons where only Tom Brady
That's right.
can't do, what did they say, Tom Brady can't throw the ball to himself.
Exactly.
I think it was Giselle.
That was that was an ESPN commentator, as I recall. I don't think
that was Giselle.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Of course it was Giselle.
So yeah, when you have a team of competitive both sides, it makes it all the more interesting.
Hang on, I'm gonna do something very important here. Sebastian, can I get a Bushmills when you get a second, please? Thank you. That's the most important thing I have to do. You got Black Bush.
You got me drinking Black Bush.
Black Bush. Excellent. So I gotta tell you, I'm a Maduro wrapper guy. I like bold but not super spicy. You know what I'm saying? I like flavor but not pop. And this of course, when Rocky Patel says, he points at you and says, "You need to buy that cigar." What do? You buy that cigar. This is very good. What are you smoking?
I'm finishing a Arturo Fuente Hemingway sun-grown, which is rare, very rare, hard to find. I love the sun-grown wrappers. But yeah, I'm gonna probably have another, and it's a Friday, so I might have a few more.
Well, that's a very good way to spend your time. It's a much better way to spend your time than talking to Michael Graham at New Hampshire Journal.
As I do every morning.
And by the way, what's your Twitter handle for those incredibly bad takes you offer on politics on a regular basis?
Micah, you're too kind as always. M.R. Bartlett. So Mr. Bartlett.
Mr. Bartlett to you.
NH. Of course, that is not my ego talking to me. It's the unfortunate initials my parents gave me.
Well, as we say here at Castro's in Bedford, Slancha. Thanks so much for joining us, man. I appreciate your time.
Cheers. Always good to join.